Hey, and welcome back to the channel. This is Great American Movie Review, and I'm going to be talking about the newest entry in the Ghostbusters franchise, Ghostbusters Frozen Empire. Yes, you heard that right. 40 years later, after the original came out in 1984, we are back again for the fourth canonical Ghostbusters movie. This is the fifth Ghostbusters movie if you count the reboot that they kind of did, that everybody just kind of ignores at this point. But either way, this is a 40-year-old franchise, and it's its fifth installment. And is it worth coming back to it? That's kind of what we're looking to answer here today. But as usual, this is going to be spoiler free, so don't have to worry about spoilers here. This is a spoiler free area. The most I'll give is just the general gist of it. So, this is a direct continuation from the 2021 film Ghostbusters Afterlife, which picked up years later with Egon Spengler's family, the Harold Ramis character from the original Ghostbusters. He has his daughter and grandkids who he's been estranged from, and they inherit his property out in the middle of nowhere after he dies. And then they kind of pick up the mantle and they become Ghostbusters, and this one has them moving to New York. They move into the firehouse. They're now operating as the official New York City Ghostbusters. And that's where you pick up. And then there's a new threat that comes around, some new ghost. So, and this one's all frosty and cold, and it makes things cold. So that's why it's Frozen Empire. And yeah, I like the original Ghostbusters about as much as the next guy. I really think that it has a lot of just 80s charm and fun to it. It's just a bunch of great comedians from the time period coming together, making something that really works. I'm not like a die-hard Ghostbusters person. I've known a few of them. A former coworker of mine in particular is an absolute die-hard Ghostbusters fan, and so I know that this franchise has that kind of audience in it. I just never have been that. This, to me, is a franchise that had one really fun movie in the 80s, a lackluster sequel, and then has just been surviving on branding basically ever since. Not to say that there haven't been good things in there. I know people like the animated stuff, people like a couple of the games. And Afterlife, I thought was an enjoyable movie. I didn't think it was a great time or anything. I just was like, yeah, no, that was a fun way to kind of bring it back. So I was cautiously looking forward to this. And I hate to say it, but I still just am kind of at a loss on this franchise. I never have quite understood how it's lasted as long as it has. There's not enough good movies in this series for it to be such a prominent film franchise. It really just has that one 1984 original, which is great. It's so much fun. And watching this movie really highlighted, I was really thinking about why that original one works, and it's literally just because that movie's just a comedy. It's light, it's breezy, everything that it does in the movie. Sure, it has this like bigger effects driven stuff going on, but ultimately it's all just character driven comedy. We have this oddball crew of people going after ghosts, and it's just kind of fun. And this feels very generic. This feels like a generic studio movie through and through. Like, there's not really any of that real DNA of the original outside of like the literal surface level elements here. Speaking of, the director here is Gil Kenan taking over for Jason Reitman. Jason Reitman, obviously son of Ivan Reitman, who directed those original two Ghostbusters films, iconic 80s filmmaker, passed away a few years ago after Afterlife came out, which Jason Reitman did direct. And so Jason Reitman stepped back from this. He was still a co-writer on it. Gil Kenan was a co-writer with Reitman on Afterlife, so it's kind of they just flipped roles basically here. Gil Kenan is, he's had some directorial efforts in the past, most notably like Monster House. He did like the City of Ember movie. Nothing like exceptional, whereas like Jason Reitman, I do think has a stronger back catalog with things like Juno and Up in the Air, really great films. But ultimately, I think Kenan does a fine job here. The problem here is just an unwillingness to let go of the past. because that was my biggest problem with Afterlife, which it didn't do it the worst that I've seen in a lot of these kind of reboot sequels, but it did still have that issue of we're just kind of repeating the same things that happened before, literally in that last movie, down to the plot points and the actual like events of the film and the same villain character. Here we're at least changing up the villain character, I guess, but that doesn't help it feel less generic. Ultimately, though, I really like the new cast that you've established in this previous movie, Afterlife, and that movie mostly let that cast just do their thing, which worked. Obviously, you have Paul Rudd in there, always a welcome presence for me. Carrie Coon is always great. And then you have the kids of McKenna Grace and Finn Wolfhard. I thought that they were great in the previous movie, too. I thought it was cool getting to shine a light on the franchise in a slightly different way through these younger characters dealing with this kind of legacy. In particular, McKenna Grace, I just think is great. I've liked her since the movie Gifted that she did with Chris Evans, where she was good at math. I just enjoyed continuing to see her grow as an actor. I think she's just got a ton of charm and personality, and she's really great in that one and continuing through that here. And she definitely gets the biggest focus in the film. I would definitely say that she's the main character, but I say that kind of in quotes. It's very much an ensemble, which is, if I'm being honest, part of the problem, because this ensemble is a little bit unyieldy for the type of movie that you're dealing with. Because you have those four who are now the Ghostbusters, that family unit. But then you even bring back the side characters from the first one, played by Celeste O'Connor and Logan Kim, you know, the podcast kid and the girl Lucky that the Finn Wolfhard Trevor character befriends. They make a return here, and that's on top of the old cast all coming back in various capacities. Dan Aykroyd, Bill Murray, Ernie Hudson, Annie Potts, even William Atherton's in this thing. So, and then they throw in a few new characters with James Acaster, Kumail Nanjiani, Emily Aylan Lind as these various characters in this movie, which, I mean, a movie's got to have new characters, right? But nobody gets to really shine in this movie. Everybody's just kind of playing second fiddle to each other. I've used, for instance, and once again, I said I'm not spoiling anything. It's really hard to spoil certain character arcs because they're just not there. So like Finn Wolfhard's character, he's 18 now. And so he's like, oh, I want to be responsible. I want to be taken seriously as an adult. It's like, okay. So then he finds Slimer up in the attic and that's it. That's kind of what he does in the movie. He just kind of tries to trap Slimer a couple times. And that's it. That's all he really gets to do in the whole movie. Paul Rudd's character, he's trying to connect as this father figure, and that's it. He doesn't have anything else. There's nothing left for him to do in the movie because there's so many other characters, and this movie's under 2 hours long, and it feels kind of long for what it is because there's so many characters you're trying to juggle around. A pretty generic plot. Ghostbusters is a fun, original idea. I don't know if it ever had the legs in it to be this 5-picture franchise. Because frankly, everything that I see in this movie, there's some cool visuals. Honestly, the visual side of things, they do a good job with that. But otherwise, it's nothing that you've not seen a million times, and not just Ghostbusters, but in other things. It's as generic a studio comedy, or as generic a studio film that you're going to get right now. And that's just really disappointing because I do think that there's a lot of great things about this franchise, and I understand that it has such a strong fan base. It's just very disappointing to see what a 40-year-old franchise just kind of stagnating. Like, it's never done anything out to justify itself to me outside of that original film. So that's just my perspective here. And this continues a trend. This franchise needs to move away from the past. It's got to separate itself from these 80s stars. You can't keep relying on them. They feel kind of shoehorned in here at points. They're there to be there. And they do write a plot around them. You know, they make a couple of them at least, with Ray and Winston get a bit more to do. But still, they get as much to do as anybody else in this movie, which, as I already illustrated, is very little. So, yeah, Ghostbusters Frozen Empire, not great. It's just totally fine. It's harmless. It's a perfectly harmless studio film that isn't going to upset anybody. It's not going to make you shout for joy. It might give you a few laughs, and then you're gonna forget about it in a month or two. But yeah, that's my thoughts on Ghostbusters Frozen Empire. Thank you for joining me for this mini non-spoiler review, and we'll see you at the movies.